who says, is wearing a cross on a chain considered a graven image?
I think that's a great question. Could I just jump in with something really quick, if that's okay, guys?
Hoping you would.
Okay, good. Because, when it comes to the idea of a graven image, we know that, this is something absolutely forbidden by God. And it's, the second commandment we read in Exodus chapter 20, verse 4. God says, you shall not make unto you any graven image or the likeness of anything that's in heaven above and earth beneath, under the water, all these things. And in verse 5, though, it makes it very clear what was wrong with, creating this graven image. It says, thou shalt not bow down yourself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. And then, of course, showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. And so I think it's pretty clear from this verse, as well as in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 1, God also tells his people again, you shall make no idols nor graven image, neither rear you up a standing image like a statue, neither shall you set up any image of stone in your land to bow down to it. Now, were there ever things that God's people erected to, have a memory like a statue? Yes. You remember when they crossed the Red Sea, they raised up, they called an Ebenezer, and it was to remember what God had done in that place. Saul, when he had won a great battle, he said, we're going to raise up an Ebenezer. And it was just like a stone structure to remember what God had done in that place, how God had delivered. And so, it was he said, I'll call the Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come. And so it's not wrong to make something, that causes you to remember God or remember what God's done, like a cross. I don't see that as a bad thing, but are you worshiping that thing? And I think that's where God makes it very clear. He says, you don't make these things to bow down to them, to worship them. And I think that's where it gets a little bit tricky because, I feel like in human nature, we have this desire to worship God, but because he's an invisible God, it's like, well, I want something tangible to show my worship. And so, it's very human nature, to want to make something to express our worship of God. And so we might, make something. Now, if I see a cross, like it causes me to remember what Christ did on the cross, I don't bow down to that cross. You know what I'm saying? I don't kiss that cross and worship that item, that, object as something worthy of worship. No, I bow down and I bow down to the God of heaven who sent his son Jesus to die on the cross. And so I think that's where, the difference is, it's not wrong to have a cross, or it's not wrong to have a picture of what we think, Jesus would be doing. Like I remember I was once selling Christian books, and this lady said, oh, that you have a picture of what Jesus is, that's a graven image. And she's like, that's offensive to me. And I was so surprised because I was like, I don't think that's the purpose of this book. I think the purpose is to teach children, get an idea of what Jesus did when he was, going around doing miracles. It just helped children understand the stories of the Bible. And so, I don't think it's wrong to have a picture or have an object or something that teaches you a spiritual truth or reminds you about something God's done. But I think it's definitely wrong when we start worshiping and bowing down to these statues. Like I've seen in certain churches, they're like kissing the feet of, Mary, or of kissing the feet of a statue of what they think Jesus might look like. And I think that's where we draw the line and go, no, you don't do that. You don't kiss the object or worship the object. You worship the God who created all these things. So anyways, Jay or Wendy, what do you guys think?
I think it's interesting that, like in the Bible, we think of what did God tell the Israelites to make it take around with them. And in their case, if we look at Deuteronomy, like starting around verse 6-7. So Deuteronomy 6-7, he talks about how, you can make a reminder, but he says to take the commandments and tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. So he's saying, like, what's the reminder? What's the thing you should take around with you? It's the commandments, and those are words. And really, ultimately, think of the Jewish tradition. What was most revered? What was uh, most celebrated by them? It would be first like the Ten Commandments, which were inside the Ark of the Covenant, which represented the throne of God. And they were not supposed to worship the Ten Commandments. They're not supposed to worship the throne, but it was supposed to be something pointing to God. And the Israelites reached a point where they forgot that. They thought that almost as they're worshiping the law itself. And during the time of Samuel, they take the law, they take the Ten Commandments, they take the Ark of the Covenant and bring it out with them into battle when they weren't supposed to. And they thought that it would just magically win the fight for them, not realizing it was the God of it that did the fighting for them. So it wasn't the object, it's the God behind it that is what really matters. And so God lets the Ten Commandments, lets the Ark of the Covenant fall into the hands of the Philistines. And for a couple of years, it was not with the Israelites. I think for a couple of years, maybe it was a couple of months. But eventually, God led it back to the Israelites. But God had them be without that object for a while to realize that's not where they need to place their hope. And yeah, go ahead, Tina.
I was just saying that's a really good point.
So yeah, I think many people use that cross as like the crutch or this magical object that will keep them safe, and that just holding up the cross is going to make demons quiver, and you can cast them out with it. And I don't believe any of that. I believe it's actual authority by which Christ has given us in his name that we cast out demons. And so it's Christ's authority in us that effectuates anything, or Christ even just by himself, not us doing anything. That is what's going to be effectual in our lives. So yeah, again, the object by itself is harmless, but as Tina, as you were saying, right, is what we make it that potentially could become problematic. And if we're putting something between us and God, or we're depending on something other than God, that's where we end up in the realm of idolatry and having problems, spiritual problems.
Yeah, for real. And I can't help but share this story. It cracked me up when it happened. So I used to work in an office, and this woman I worked with was such a sweetheart. I loved her to death. But she had a little statue of like I guess a saint, and God bless her because she was so genuine. I think she was totally innocent in it. But she would tell me, she's like, she's like, when I was like, I said something about like, oh, I'll pray for you. And she's like, oh, that's okay. I'll just rub my statue. And she had a little statue of the saint or whatever on her desk, like kind of um, next to her keyboard. And she would just rub it like, oh, as long as I rub this statue, God's going to bless me. And I was like, oh dear. And so it was just kind of funny, even though I was like, and I know she meant it in the best way. And like, but I was like, how do I tell her that, God is so much more powerful than you rubbing a little statue under your desk? And so, it's just, and I can't imagine what God mean well, but the truth is I am so much more powerful. You don't need to rub that statue. You just need to call on my name. You need to, with a pure heart, and it's God who's going to bless you, not, the rubbing of a statue or what have you.